Jeffrey Tucker, Hernan Kazah e Florian Hagenbuch.
Lei. Junte-se a nós e se inspire nos valores dos pioneiros de ontem e de hoje. Aprenda com quem é referência no que faz. Conecte-se com o propósito de construir um futuro melhor. Quanto mais conhecimento você adquire, mais livre e mais líder você se torna. 7º Fórum Liberdade e Democracia, dias 1, 2 e 3 de setembro, na sua casa.
Boa tarde a todos. Ser pioneiro é um desafio. Você precisa enxergar uma oportunidade, repensar algo, ou mesmo se reinventar. Falando nisso, o pioneiro tem um importante papel de fomentar o mercado, a concorrência, inovando, gerando valor e fazendo com que o livre mercado, que nós liberais acreditamos, funcione perfeitamente, até que o Estado intervenha. Além de intervir, o Estado algumas vezes compete com as empresas privadas, o que é inadmissível. É como se um jogo de futebol o juiz também jogasse. E o pior, sem compromisso por gerar resultado. Só ver quantas empresas públicas fizeram greve ao longo dos anos. É como o Gustavo Franco mesmo falou. Você sabe que tem que privatizar quando a empresa está em greve, mas ninguém nota a diferença. Imagine como é ser pioneiro num mundo em que as coisas mudam a toda hora e o tráfego de informações é dinâmico, ilimitado e sem fronteiras. Várias oportunidades aparecem para que você crie uma solução global, em qualquer lugar, sem sair da sua casa e, o melhor, com pouco investimento. Estamos na era do conhecimento ilimitado e com valor acessível. Veja o caso deste fórum. São 700 minutos com grandes empreendedores, executivos e acadêmicos de renome internacional, pelo preço de um hambúrguer. O mercado está cheio de oportunidade para quem quer enxergar. Cristina Junqueira, do Nubank, viu sua empresa crescer exponencialmente, com o objetivo inicial muito simples: oferecer um cartão de crédito sem anuidade. Parece óbvio, mas isso só foi um ponto de partida para conquistar os seus 26 milhões de clientes, em um mercado extremamente consolidado. Sem mais spoilers, gostaria de chamar o próximo painel: Pioneirismo na Era da Exponencialidade, com Cristina Junqueira, Jeffrey Tucker, Hernan Kazah e Florian Hagenbuch, com mediação de Helio Beltrão.
Welcome to this next panel, and we're going to be talking about the pioneers of the exponential economy in Brazil and throughout Latin America and the world. So, pioneer is a word that comes from French, actually, pionnier, who were the foot soldiers who would dig the trenches before the army could then follow them.
Que o Estado intervenha. Além de intervir, o Estado algumas vezes compete com as empresas privadas, o que é inadmissível. É como se um jogo de futebol o juiz também jogasse. E o pior, sem compromisso por gerar resultado. Só ver quantas empresas públicas fizeram greve ao longo dos anos. É como o Gustavo Franco mesmo falou. Você sabe que tem que privatizar quando a empresa está em greve, mas ninguém nota a diferença. Imagine como é ser pioneiro num mundo em que as coisas mudam a toda hora e o tráfego de informações é dinâmico, ilimitado e sem fronteiras. Várias oportunidades aparecem para que você crie uma solução global, em qualquer lugar, sem sair da sua casa e, o melhor, com pouco investimento. Estamos na era do conhecimento ilimitado e com valor acessível. Veja o caso deste fórum. São 700 minutos com grandes empreendedores, executivos e acadêmicos de renome internacional, pelo preço de um hambúrguer. O mercado está cheio de oportunidade para quem quer enxergar. Cristina Junqueira, do Nubank, viu sua empresa crescer exponencialmente, com o objetivo inicial muito simples: oferecer um cartão de crédito sem anuidade. Parece óbvio, mas isso só foi um ponto de partida para conquistar os seus 26 milhões de clientes em um mercado extremamente consolidado. Sem mais spoilers, gostaria de chamar o próximo painel. Pioneirismo na era da exponencialidade, com Cristina Junqueira, Jeffrey Tucker, Hernan Kazah e Florian Hagenbuch, com mediação de Helio Beltrão.
Welcome to this next panel, and we're going to be talking about the pioneers of the exponential economy in Brazil and throughout Latin America and the world. So, pioneer is a word that comes from French, actually, pionnier, who were the foot soldiers who would dig the trenches before the army could then follow them. So these guys are definitely doing that. I'm an admirer of all of them, actually. I don't know them personally, all of them personally. Today, it's my opportunity to talk to them and chat to them. Let's hear what they have to say. Excellent. So I would ask you guys to introduce yourselves first, and then we can start a conversation. Chris, go ahead, please.
Sure, my pleasure. So to begin with, I wanted to thank the opportunity to be here with you today and to share a little bit about how we're thinking about pioneering within the financial services space. My name is Cristina Junqueira. I'm one of the founders of Nubank, which is the largest fintech outside Asia, I guess, outside China. We started here in Brazil in 2013. It's been roughly 7 years since we first started working together, my partners and I. And it's been quite a journey. So till date, we're serving 26, 27 million customers in Brazil. We've expanded internationally. We've begun operations in Mexico earlier this year. We now have offices and people working, well, I guess in every time zone globally because of remote work and COVID. But we continue on this very bold mission of just fighting complexity and giving people back control over their finances, giving them back their dignity over their lives and control over their money.
Florian.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm excited to also talk about pioneerism and sharing the stage here with a lot of different pioneers. My name is Florian Hagenbuch. I'm an entrepreneur since 2012. I'm currently in my second journey in the real estate space. We founded a company called Loft that's reinventing the process of buying and selling real estate digitally. Before that, I founded a company in the online printing space that was also, very nice story from end to finish. Very much pioneering also the e-commerce space in Brazil in 2011 and 12. And in addition to being an entrepreneur, I'm also an active investor, having invested in over 80 companies personally, and also being a co-founder of a fund called Canary. That's probably the first seed-focused fund in Latin America. So yeah, I'm excited to be here, and thank you for the invite.
Hernan.
Hello, everyone. Also a pleasure to be here. My name is Hernan Kazah. I am the co-founder and managing partner of Kazah Ventures, a venture capital firm focused on Latin America. We've raised so far 5 funds, over $1 billion in capital. And we've been doing this for the last 10 years, partnering with entrepreneurs like Cristina at Nubank and with many of the startups that Florian backed. And before that, I was co-founder and COO of Mercado Libre for 12 years. So I've been around in this market for more than 20 years now.
Thank you, Hernan. Jeffrey.
My name is, first of all, I'm so glad to be here. I wanted to come back to one of my favorite cities in the world, Sao Paulo, and I was looking forward to being there. I want to go every year to Brazil without exception. This year, unfortunately, I have to stay here because of all the restrictions, but I'm still pleased to be invited here. My name is Jeffrey Tucker, and I work as the editorial director for the American Institute for Economic Research, which was founded 87 years ago. We're over here in Massachusetts. We do economic research. I'm the author of many books, some of which are mostly focused on technology and entrepreneurship and innovation. And I'm the founder of the very first conference on cryptocurrency that took place in the United States in 2013. So I've been writing about that topic for a very long time, and also innovation and money and finance and technology, generally speaking.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. So let's start with Hernan. Hernan, this month was the same month that Apple surpassed Saudi Aramco as the largest company in the world. So it's like the last domino falling, I believe. Saudi Aramco, $2 trillion of valuation surpassed by Apple. And Meli, Mercado Livre, is also now the largest Latin American company in value. $60 billion in value. It's amazing, incredible. And you helped found this company with Marcos Galperin back in the 90s, still before the bubble burst. And as the bubble burst, I guess more than 90% of the companies went belly up or something like that. So why don't
99 probably.
Probably 99. I was hoping you say that. So how come you were able to succeed? Tell us a little bit about the cash story at that point, and how important it is the team continue changing. Tell us the story of the beginnings, please.
Sure, and I think you're totally right. That is one of those events that if you were able to play them once and again and again and again, probably in 9 out of 10 of those scenarios, you don't make it out. But luckily we did. And I think we did, obviously luck played the role, as it always does. But also there are some characteristics that were part of the initial culture of Mercado Libre and that are still a significant part of the culture of the company, and what probably made it all the way to a valuation of over $60 billion now, what sounds crazy, but at the same time, somehow expected, because we were always very bullish that technology was going to rule markets, and that the largest companies in the world were going to be tech companies, and that the largest companies in Latin America were going to be tech company. But by going back to that story, we raised our first round in October '99. Prior to that, we had received some angel investing in June '99. And during those months, it was really easy to raise capital. For a short period of time, capital looked to be kind of totally available to anyone, was not a scarce resource, was limitless. And because of that, we were able to raise those 2 rounds and start a company in an environment where technology was almost unknown in the region. Internet penetration at the time was 3, 4, 5%. All of that was dial-up. Almost nobody had broadband, and obviously mobile internet had to wait another probably 10 years to get started. So for the very early days of the internet, nobody knew what e-commerce meant. So we were lucky to raise capital with the bullishness that the market had at the time. And then in March 2000, the NASDAQ started to go down, and we were raising capital at the time. It was a really difficult moment for us. Luckily, we were able to raise some capital. Initially, I think we had like 10 term sheets, and then day after day, one of the investors was calling and saying, "Hey, I'm withdrawing my term sheet," and the following day was another one, and we're left with only 1 term sheet. That investor also called and said that he wanted to withdraw his offer. Luckily, somehow we convinced that investor to stick with that offer. I think that at the time, some investors were saying the market is making a correction, but then eventually it will go up again. After we closed that round in May,
What a long
2000,
correction.
and Nasdaq kept on going down all the way to October. So we were lucky in a way. But that gave us more than $40 million for a company that had no revenues whatsoever. And today that may not sound that crazy, but at the time it was. So we realized that the rules of the game had changed, and that with that capital, we had to be very careful. Obviously, continue investing in growth because the market was very nascent, so we had to invest in what was going to come, but also think about it with a long-term perspective. And I think that was one of the reasons that the company ended up succeeding on is long-term focused. The other one was we really tried to play around technology and not marketing, not other things that some of our competitors were doing at the time. And then the team was really committed to that idea of having a long-term vision. And if you look at Mercado Libre today, all the people that were in leadership positions at the time are still today in the company. So Marcos, who was the CEO, still the CEO, and Osvaldo continues to lead Mercado Pago 21 years later, and Helio is now the COO, and he continues to lead a significant part of the company. Pedro is the CFO. So many of the people that were there then are still today leading the company. And that was because everyone was really focused on the long term, and when the market went down, they did not get depressed. They thought that there was an opportunity of building something in the long run. And that's what we did. And interestingly, all our competitors ran out of money because they thought that, again, this was a correction in the market and they were going to be able to raise more capital. Obviously, they could not. And we ended up buying most of them for a penny almost. And then also we went public in 2007, still with like $20 million in the bank out of that round in the year 2000. So we invested during that period of time, but with a significant focus on making sure that we're building a sustainable story.
Wonderful. It seems that luck also played a part in you being to raise money in the beginning of 2000 and another big round right on the eve of the 2008 crash. Amazingly lucky.
No, we were lucky because if we had raised capital probably a few months earlier, we would have spent it faster and then would have been in trouble. Or if we had gone to the market maybe 2 or 3 months later, we wouldn't have been able to raise it. So yeah, we were lucky in a way, but then also played the cards the right way.
Exactly. Otherwise, you wouldn't reach the stage you are today. Congratulations, Hernan. Chris, so 13 years later than the 2000 event that Hernan is talking about, you decided with your partners to start a new bank. And amazingly, what strikes me as the most amazing thing is usually a company strikes big with one product. And you were able to do it with 2 products, the credit card and the NuConta. So 2 amazing products. So congratulations on that. But before you were worth, like today, $10 billion, right in the beginning in 2013, how was it right there as you were starting out? I think people would want to understand what happens in the first few weeks and months. How was your day-to-day at that stage?
Well, in the beginning, there's a lot of just like boring stuff that you got to do, right? Like you got to set up the company, you got to find an office space, you got to, open a bank account, and all those things in Brazil are especially hard for a young company. I remember a lot, there's at least one bank that we're still waiting to this day to hear back from them on our account application. That we still weren't able to open an account. So everything was hard, right? I remember that we had raised a seed money, some seed money from international investors from Sequoia, from Kazah, by the way. Thank you, Hernan. And it took months. Yeah, I think you're pretty happy about that seed investment.
It's a very successful voluntary exchange you guys did.
Very good investment you made. So very early on, it took months until we had the CNPJ, right? Like the company ID, until we had a bank account, until we could bring that money into the country. So there was a lot of just this scrappiness. Like we bootstrapped the company for months until we could even have access to some of those resources. So it was a lot of just, especially myself, because my other partners are foreigners. So, it was, they were limited in their ability to own their own CPFs, to go and fetch like a rental agreement or to get insurance or to get, any financial services product. So it was a lot of hard work. I remember sleeping was a big luxury because we just couldn't afford to waste a single minute. And it was a mixture of so many things, of, just paying bills and setting up like the bank account and getting AC installed on the very first like office space that was like this little house that we rented, all the way to talking to the central bank and setting up things with MasterCard, which was going to be like our big network partner, and some of the other big things that we needed to do. So in the early days of your entrepreneur journey, you got to be willing to do all those things. In a day, you're going to be going from, a very mundane type of concerns and situations to very high stakes conversations. And that's just life.
Wonderful. I also would like to hear from you, Florian, the beginnings, because I know, though you lived in Brazil, you were outside of Brazil at that time and decided to come with your partner to Brazil, which strikes me already as a big surprise. I know at that time Brazil was one of the BRICS, but it feels as if the brick fell on our heads in 2014 and 15, 16, etc. So Brazil was not only not anymore this big star. And tell me a little bit in the beginning when you were pitching for your first printing venture with an 8-page PowerPoint and just a 1-week roadshow. So how was that story, and why did you think you would make it in Brazil?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So my story is I grew up here as a kid. I was born in Germany, but I grew up here from the age of 4 onwards. So I would say I consider myself 51% German, 49% Brazilian, and depending on the day or on the football match, that changes.
Yeah, exactly.
A little.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. Who do you root for?
It really depends. So 2002, I was rooting really in favor of Brazil. In 2014, I was rooting for Germany just because I thought they had the better team. But it depends. It fluctuates. I like to joke every World Cup, I'm in a good position. I have a very good shot at being in the final. So that's very good. So I had grown up here, obviously, had learned all the, the challenges that the country has. But, I think when you're an entrepreneur, a pioneer, many times you see the challenges as opportunities. So the way I always felt about it was there were a lot of opportunities in Brazil. So I went to university. I started my career in finance, and at some point I said, that's not for me. I don't want to, keep doing the whole finance career trajectory. And I said, I want to start a company, and I'm going to do it in Brazil, driven by the challenges / opportunities that were here in the market. And I still remember very well those years, 2011, 2012. I think Hernan will also remember those times. There were a lot of foreigners coming to Brazil, starting companies. I think Nubank is also around that time. A lot of foreigners coming here, especially in the e-commerce space. So a lot of, you had furniture e-commerce, you had baby goods e-commerce, you had all sorts of these different verticals, and it felt like a little bit of a pioneering time at the time, and that was a really good feeling. But I think the misconception a little bit at the time was that it was going to be a gold rush type thing. As you mentioned, BRICS. Many people said Brazil is the next China. And I think for someone who had grown up here, that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. They say Brazil is always going to be the country of the future. I'm generally very optimistic and bullish on Brazil, but it's probably never as good as we think it is. It's also never as bad as we think it is. It's just kind of somewhere in between. And so that was the time, and a lot of these, pioneers starting these companies with, for the first time, I'd say, pretty ambitious visions. With regards to our first company, we pitched a few funds. We weren't very experienced, nor very we didn't really understand the whole game of venture capital. How does it work? How do you position yourself, and does it make sense to take capital in the first place? And I think I must have pitched Hernan in my life maybe 3-4 times, including at that time. And I think at the time, we had a competitor at Rocket Internet, which was a kind of like a startup incubator, also German, so like a lot of foreigners. And they were competing with us, and I think that was one of the reasons at the end of the day that we couldn't get funding from Hernan specifically at that time. But it was an amazing process just to get the word out there, tell your story, and it's one of those things. The more you practice, the more perseverance you have, the better you become at it. And so I think it's you gotta get a lot of no's in order to merit the eventual yes.
Excellent.
It is great to hear that Florian was not born as an incredible salesman, because
that's true.
I thought he had that in his DNA.
Yes, that's true.
In a good way, I mean it, but he's great at pitching.
That's true, but because most of the times the guys who do good sales pitches are not necessarily the best entrepreneurs. So that's at least my experience with it. Let me jump to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I don't know if you know this story, but when I was working at Banco Garantia back in 1997, you were the guy behind Mises.org, the site, and were pushing for new let's say online, it wasn't called at the time podcast or anything, but I was able to listen to a talk from the professors of Austrian economics at the time through my link at Garantia, which was the fastest in Brazil. It took only 3 hours to listen to half an hour's talk. And of course, you had indirectly a great, enormous influence on my trajectory because you were disrupting the business of think tanks. A think tank usually is something that is on a capital, and people are rubbing shoulders with the politicians, and they're paying like a couple $100,000 to publish policy papers and things like that. And you decided to push directly to the opinion leaders through the internet and talking directly to the people. And of course, I copied that in Brazil and tried to do the same thing here. And I think we're moving in that direction. Tell us a little bit about how technology, you think, can impact the idea environment in the U.S., in Brazil, in the world. You've been so many times to Brazil, and you know our landscape as well.
Helio, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but there was a moment when I realized that something magical could take place through the internet, and I'm thinking it might have been something like maybe 1995 or 93, something like this, or maybe 94. But I was sitting there, or maybe a little bit later. But I was sitting in my office, and this new thing called the internet was out there, and the web browser had just come along. And at that time, it was mostly people writing emails back and forth to each other. And then sometimes you would have a group of people on what was then called a listserv and that sort of thing. It was just chat. But there wasn't a real sense that you could reach the world yet. And once the technology became kind of available to put things on the World Wide Web, I began to experiment a little bit with just posting a few articles and a few thoughts, and sending them around to people. And I began to think, well, this is kind of interesting, isn't it? And so I began to put more and more and more. And at some point I was sitting in my office chair, and I had a book about 10 feet away from me, but I was feeling kind of lazy. And I didn't want to get out of my chair to go get it. And I thought, wouldn't it be something if I could read that book that's on that shelf over there just by sitting here on my computer and clicking? And what if I could make that same book available to other people? That one physical book over there on that bookshelf is only available to me because I get up and get it. But if I put this thing on the internet, it's available to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, potentially billions of people. And it was just that little moment of realization that when any kind of ideas can leave their being trapped in the physical world and can become digitized, they become potentially infinitely distributable. Now, maybe that's just perfectly obvious to us now, but it wasn't so obvious back then. I remember I was talking to my mother on the phone, and I said, I have a picture I want to send you through email. She said, "Oh, don't do that. You can just keep it. Just keep it for yourself." And I said, "Well, Mom, it turns out I can send it to you, and I also retain it for myself." And she said, "But now, how is that possible?" And because people didn't understand. Anyway, realizing the infinite reproducibility of ideas in the internet was a big moment in my life, and so it changed my life completely. And I became really a fanatic for digital spaces. I put up many thousands of books online in the commons, available for the world. Even now, I'm sure it's still in use. That's the other thing. Once you put something online, it becomes this durable product available potentially, forever. There'll always be a copy of it anywhere. I mean, the power of that is beyond description. And I thought, this is the way we can change the world. So yeah, I built Mises.org over the course of those 15 following years. Went on to build Laissez-Faire Books and founded the very first digital book club online in the United States anyway. And then went to the Foundation for Economic Education that turned them from being a lazy site that hardly anybody looked at to being one of the most viral economic websites in the world. And then founded my own company, Liberty.me, a social network, and then came to the American Institute for Economic Research. And now I'm very proud to say that we are the #1 economics research institute in the world for traffic, beating, even in the United States, The Economist magazine. And you do it through persistence and drive and passion and love, and you never condescend to your readers. You never try to manipulate people. What you're trying to do is give them useful, intelligent, high-level material that people can trust. They come to trust your integrity and your scholarship and your research, and you develop a kind of a relationship with your consumers that becomes persistent and gradually grows and grows and grows until you have a genuine network, and then you can actually enact genuine social change. But it requires a kind of not impatience. You get up every day and say, what can I do today to improve slightly, to get some more information out there, to adapt a new technology, to find a new and better way to do things, to leave the past behind and forge a new way. And you do that every day. And after 5 years, you turn around and look, and you realize you've built an empire that's capable of changing the world.
Jeffrey, I think these guys here are already thinking how to disrupt the suit that you and I are wearing. So be careful, because I'm feeling intimidated already. So
you have the liberty and the freedom of wearing whatever the hell you want.
Oh, thank you very much. That I love that sentence. Wonderful. But okay, a question for Hernan and to all of you actually. It struck me that people that are watching us might think, but come on, these guys are very educated, very well educated. How can I ever become like an entrepreneur like them? I know that Hernan took an MBA at Stanford. Chris also took an MBA or something of sorts. Of course, Florian, you started very early, but
undergrad at Wharton.
Undergrad at Wharton. So do you need to have an MBA or an international education to strike big? What do you look into your companies? Because now you run Kazah, a very successful, large VC. So do you look for guys that are MBAs like yourselves, and does that make a difference at all? Is it something that people should be looking for? How important is education after all?
Thank you, Helio, for the question, and just allow me for a second to clarify my last comment, and it's very related to the concept of pioneers and also to your current question. That is, salesmanship is a fundamental skill that entrepreneurs need. Obviously, salesmanship does not guarantee success, but lack of salesmanship probably guarantees failure, because you need to be able to sell your vision to your employees, your co-founders, to your investors, to your customers. You need to create that kind of halo that allows companies to go forward when everything looks impossible. So I just want to make sure that I get that right. And then I think it's part of what we look into when we are talking to founders. You don't look for any particular educational background, but you do look for traits that can tell you that person has gone through different challenges and passed them and succeeded. And obviously, if you have a high education in institutions that are difficult to get in and where you have to work hard, that tells you something. But you can also have great entrepreneurs that are very young, that haven't even gone to a university, but you can see that they are willing to tear walls apart, and that's good enough. So what you look for is first of all, as I said, this salesmanship concept. Then you look for lots of passion. They need to have an irrational commitment to what they are doing. If it's just rational, it goes away eventually, or eventually you face a big problem and you drop it because it's easier to go back to your prior job than trying to solve it. We need to have that irrational component there.
So you mean, just to clarify, just 1 second. So if you would to be rational looking at whether or not you should become an entrepreneur, probably, especially in Brazil and in Argentina, probably you wouldn't do it, right? You're saying that...
You're totally right. If you build a probability tree, the rational decision is not to go for it. So you have to be so convinced, so committed, that you go beyond what a rational thinking process tells you. And that's very important. And then the last point, and I'll let the others comment on this as well, is in our mind, it needs to be product-focused, tech-focused. The solution, the mode you're building has to be related with technology, and technology has the beauty of economies of scale. So when you're applying the right model, the right tech solution to a problem, typically as you grow, you gain in economies of scale, you gain in kind of stickiness with your customers, etc. So those are at very high level the things we look into entrepreneurs. Salesmanship, commitment, irrational commitment to what they're doing, and a strong focus on the product, on the technology.
Guys, please comment.
Let me add to that. Probably, however, Hernan and the folks at Kazah think about how to select entrepreneurs, and that is not exactly the same thing about how us as entrepreneurs think about selecting people to work with us, right? So I'll add my take on that note. And here's how I think about it. So I usually like to bring in people who first learn really fast, because things are always changing. Like when you're in a fast-paced growth type of company, every 6 months is a completely different company. Those are completely different challenges. So if people are not learning extremely fast and very flexible and adaptable, like it's not going to work. So those are probably the two most important things. And of course, like a different groups within the company or different stage that you're at, like you might want to also bring like certain specific experience from the market. So if you want to save some time from mistakes that people have made elsewhere in different types of company, have already scaled, and you're like, looking to scaling right now, you might want to look for that. But that's on context-specific type of situations. The other thing that I tell people that I really care about is I need people to really care about what we're doing. So I tell people that I can teach them anything. I can teach them the business. I can teach them technology. I can teach them, about the product, about the industry, whatever it is. But I cannot teach them how to give a damn. They got to give a damn. So that's probably the most important thing. And when I think about education plays a role today. I think it's going to play a smaller and smaller role in the future. But it's more of a signaling role, right? When we look, and Hernan touched on that a little bit. So when you take a look at a resume and someone has gone through, whether that's, undergraduate programs or colleges or MBAs or whatever it is, and those are hard programs, hard to get in, hard to get out, because the course load is very intense. They're signaling in grit. They're signaling in this person's ability to learn. There's a lot of positive signaling. But more and more, we're seeing people acquire those skills in different places, that not just education, traditional types of path. So I think less and less that's going to be important. The last thing that I'll add to this is on the salesmanship point that you guys made. It's funny because I heard, I don't remember whom saying a sentence the other day, that you're either selling or you're working for someone that is, and it's funny because I hadn't thought about like sales. I've always thought something similar, but I thought about communication, because I think for any type of entrepreneur, any type of leader, really, like you got to be able to communicate really, really, really well. And that's how you sell, right? Like that's through communication. That's through understanding your audience, understanding what is it that what's the message that you want to convey? What's the best way to convey that message to those people? And how to think linearly. Because when you do, it's much easier for you to translate the strategy, whatever it is in your mind, to the action steps that you got to take. So, but I guess sales fits well within that framework in terms of communicating well, and I really believe that's a key skill.
Excellent. Florian, education.
Yeah, I completely agree with all the points that were made. I think getting into good college, having a good degree on your resume is much more a proxy for perseverance and also competitiveness, quite frankly, because it always will be a competitive world out there, whether in business or anything else. So when it comes to the knowledge and skills, in the world that we live in, there's really no limits to accessing any of those via the power of digital power of the internet. You have all of that available. And I think certainly in the year that we live in now, in the middle of this pandemic, I think our traditional way of understanding how education works has been completely flipped upside down. Whether you have friends going to college or you have children, and it's just been reinvented. And so a lot of the trends that we were already seeing before the pandemic, we would have probably answered the same thing in February or in January that we answered now. But that has now been accelerated. And I think you can be a high school student from a small town somewhere in the middle of Brazil, and you can have access to the same knowledge and skills that are taught at Harvard today because of the internet. It will require effort. It will require perseverance to find it, to make sure you acquire it, and make sure that you end up using it somehow in a productive way. But that's not that different from getting into Harvard in the first place. And so that proxy ends up being the same thing. So I completely agree with the comments that were made.
Well, it seems to have a lot to do with attitude, with habits and values. What do you think of it, Jeffrey?
Yeah, let me tell just a couple of quick stories about this. When I was looking for a video producer to start a new video program here, I didn't go to the film schools or try to contract this out to some big tech firm or something like that. What I did was went through YouTube to find one person who had a real talent, who was out there, who's making very impressive content on a regular basis, like an incredible work ethic I was looking for. And I contacted him and gave him a couple of tests, and he passed. He was just fantastic. It turns out this guy never went to film school, never even, barely graduated actually high school. He just has a wild love of the art. And now our videos are going viral all the time, and he puts them out about once a week. And he's just one guy working alone with absolutely no credentials at all. So I think these are the kinds of things you need to look for when you hire. I know when I read resumes myself, I have a kind of a bad habit of forgetting even to look at the education part of it, actually, because what I'm really looking for is evidence of love and passion, scrupulosity, attention to detail, and a kind of irrational fanaticism, as you say. I'll tell you one more story about very interesting. Just two quick stories. One is I had an intern in. He's a graduate from an Ivy League university who didn't know what to do with his degree, and bumped from a couple of companies. Was kind of unhappy and a little bit overlooked. Came to me as an intern. And I had mostly ignored the guy, and he'd been here, I guess, 3 months. And then about the third month, I began to realize that this guy was performing miracles, and I had become to depend on him, like fundamentally, for all of our book production, and that he was the most trouble-free employee I think I had ever had, and glorious things were happening around me. And I walked into him, and I'm sorry, what's your name again? I can running a big company. And he told me, and I said, and when does your internship actually end? He goes, well, it ends next week. And I said, you know what? I'm going to fix that. And an hour later, I had a contract on his desk. I said, you're coming to work for us. And he signed up, and boom. And he's a miracle worker. I'll tell you one other story of an intern I had very recently, also a graduate of a very high-end university. And I noticed in the first couple of weeks, and I don't have a lot of time to train people, but I took out some time to train this guy. And he kept showing up late, and he kept sort of not finishing his work, but then he would sort of pretend as if he had done his work and not really listen very carefully. And I got frustrated with him. So I sat him down. I said, listen, I have to tell you something really interesting. I am not your father. I'm not here to spy on you and get you in trouble. You don't need to try to trick me into the idea that you're working. I'm not your professor, so you can't stay up all night, do an all-nighter, and write a long paper full of gibberish that you copied off the internet and hope to get an A. That is not the kind of relationship we're going to have. I am your boss, it's true, but we have to be partners. And what we're working for is not for grades, not for compliance, not for an allowance. We are working on a mission together, and we have to be partners. That mission is not about you, it's not about me, it's about the thing we're trying to do together. And I desperately need your help as a partner so we can change the world together. So don't try to comply anymore. I don't need your compliance. What I need is your passion and your love, your teamwork, and a commitment that we're going to work together to do this. And he said, later, actually, I hired him. And he told me that talk had changed his life. And now he's one of my most valuable employees.
You made him an entrepreneur, because that's exactly what an entrepreneur does, is to see a vision, to see the future, to see something that society needs, and then go like crazy, try to convince them like an evangelist, try to have everybody on the same boat, and you infected him with his entrepreneurial vision. Congratulations, Jeffrey. Cristina, I was thinking about your third product. Of course, you're thinking about many third products for Nubank. And I saw what happened with WhatsApp Pay, that you had a partnership. And then the Central Bank of Brazil came with their project, Pix, which I think will revolutionize many things in the industry here. But it's like a central bank digital currency. And I would like, Jeffrey, you to comment on that from crypto, this perspective as well. So now, you cannot do so far the WhatsApp Pay idea. You probably have to join in some way, I don't know, the Pix project. But for Jeffrey and maybe Hernan, if they don't know what's going on, it's like you can have, it's a central bank mode of payment, or maybe you can call it a crypto, that you can anybody with a wallet, a digital wallet, can receive directly. So you can pay the bills directly. You don't need to go through banks. So this is a big disintermediation of banks project. So what do you think of PIX in general, Cristina?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, because this is a theme that I'm very passionate about. And let me start by saying, just clarifying, so PIX is not cryptocurrency. The currency is the same, right? It is a digital means of payment in the sense that, people are going to be paying for stuff like using the PIX rails, which is an infrastructure that is being built by the central bank. And it's amazing. Like we have been working with the central bank for over a year now in PIX specifically. We've been joining them in the conversations. We've been thinking partners to them in terms of everything that you can think of, like infrastructure, scalability, cybersecurity, like everything that you can think of, even user interfaces and communication and how consumers can understand how PIX is going to work. So we're extremely excited. On WhatsApp, like think about WhatsApp as a channel that could take many means of payments, including PIX, but including credit cards, including debit cards. And so, it would be great if WhatsApp was already working, but and the central bank is taking its time to make sure that it's 100% compliant, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. But it's not necessarily related to PIX. I think PIX is it's like almost orthogonal to the discussion of WhatsApp, and we're extremely excited because this has so much potential of disintermediating so many things. Paying things in Brazil is so complex and so expensive for a lot of in a lot of ways. So
just a second. Today, Bradesco announced the first half of 2020 profit, net income, was 7 billion reais. So maybe that's the last time we see.
Who announced? Bradesco, yeah. Well, that's a whole different chapter of this conversation.
I know.
So I'm going to glance over like that.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. So there's a lot of unnecessary fees that are being paid out there. Let's just leave it at that. So Nubank alone, with both credit card and the account product that you've mentioned, we've saved customers until the end of 2019. So that was probably the last time that we updated this calculation. But over 8 billion reais in fees. Our customers have saved over 8 freaking billion reais.
You have more than 20 million
fees.
Customers, right?
26 million customers. But by year end, last year was around 20, I guess. So it's just insane the amount of fees that are charged in this country, and we're so excited about the possibilities of PIX. It's going to help so much, not just things to be more efficient in the sense of cost, but also imagine being able to transfer 24/7, 7 days a week, 36 days, 365 days a year. Today, you want to do a doc, you want to do a TED. Oh, it's 5 p.m. It's not going to go through today. No, I need your bank branch number, your account number, your CPF, your full name. You're almost asking for somebody's underwear collar, to be able to transfer them some money. It's horrible, and people are going to be able to use either their CPF or their phone or their email or some quick QR code, and it's going to be safe and it's going to be instant. It's just amazing, and we've been nothing.
You're going to make money out of it.
How do you make money on it? So first of all, you make the customer experience just much better, right? And we're already seeing a lot of banks, some of.
Why would a person need Nubank if you can have directly in your wallet?
Well, a wallet won't be able to do everything that a financial institution does to you, right? Like we believe in depth of relationships. So we believe the institutions that are going to win are the institutions whose customers are going to want and prefer to do business with them. So it's not just about the payment. Like the payment is just one layer. A very thin layer, actually. So people are still going to need financing. People are still going to need to save some money. People are still going to need to, get their salaries in, and they're going to prefer to do that with companies that treat them well, that offer a good experience. So that's what we're excited about, because we're so well positioned to capture, the customers' hearts, and that's what we've been doing since we started. We say that we want customers to love us phonetically, and for the most part, they do. That's what we're here to do, and that's how we think we're going to be well positioned.
Wonderful. You're one of the most beloved companies in Brazil.
We are. We're a love brand, as we like to do, to talk about ourselves. Like, people go on Twitter and say that they want to marry us, that they want to have our babies, that they wish their boyfriends and girlfriends would treat them like we do. So yeah, that's what we're betting on.
But you mentioned briefly about financing and loans and personal loans, and I know you've started looking at that. And I think my opinion is that that's the biggest disintermediation project you might have on the banking system in Brazil, because they control basically credit. And Florian, of course, you at Loft, when you're buying real estate, you need financing. And I'm guessing Hernan also has many companies that would benefit from proper financing. In Brazil, it's very expensive. So how can you go about having a digital impact on loans to compete with the banks, and how can Nubank and all of this new thing help in your business?
I'll just pass to Florian in a minute, but I'll just say, so Pix is one piece of this big thing called open banking, right? So this is a trend that's been happening elsewhere in the world, and there won't be turning back from this. Like, everything's going to be disintermediated, and people are going to be owners of their information, and that's the biggest thing. To democratize access to credit. So at Nubank, we've already been using alternative data sources for years now, and our underwriting models for the credit card specifically are, years ahead of what everyone else has. And that's why we've been able, even through the pandemic, to have much lower delinquency rates than what we're seeing the market have despite our high growth. So I think that's the same thing that's going to happen. Like, the more and more we grow, the more and more we use digital technologies and different data sets, the more we're going to be able to underwrite efficiently.
Excellent. But before you move, Florian, Jeffrey, can you just comment on this project in Brazil is direct payment and wallets, and how does that relate to your vision for crypto and let's call it a private currency?
Sure. Just real quickly, my first transaction with Bitcoin was in February of 2013, and it was a real revelation to me because it was a pure peer-to-peer transaction. I had to actually spend the money. I sold one of my bow ties is what happened. I sold a bow tie for
you sold a bow tie?
I sold a bow
thought
tie.
You kept a storage of all your bow ties.
For 3 Bitcoin.
That is expensive today.
3 Bitcoin? No way. Oh my goodness.
I think Bitcoin was $3 at the time. I don't know. Maybe it's $12, something like that. But then I did the calculation. I said, well, give me 3 Bitcoins. So I sold him my tie. And then I spent about 2 of that on a pair of pliers or something. So I could have been rich. But and the thing that struck me most about it was that it was a peer-to-peer transaction, and the unit that I was using was not connected to any national currency. And so that was, like, again, a mind-blowing thing for me, and I was desperate to understand it. I held a conference later that year called the Cryptocurrency Conference, where I brought in academics from around the country just trying to figure out what this stuff is and why it matters. There was a great deal of optimism in those days that cryptocurrency could become a separate payment system and monetary system on its own. There were several ways in which we were wrong about that, and I'll just quickly tell you why. One is that it turned out that Bitcoin could not scale like the way it was supposed to. Within a few years, it was actually slower and more expensive than using traditional payment systems. So that was a huge failing. There were lots of forks that happened, and now a lot of those problems have been fixed. But 2015, 2016, that was a difficult thing to realize. The second thing we came to realize is that the user experience for cryptocurrency was far too difficult for regular people to get involved in. There's too easy to make mistakes. There's no way to recover your money. One time I was in somewhere. I guess I was in Budapest, and I was handing out crypto to everybody in the crowd, just to show them how easy it was to get. I would send them 20 cents or something like that. And I was talking to somebody, and I was filling on my phone trying to send a guy 20 cents. And something told me I was doing something wrong, and I looked down, and I realized I was about to send him $2,000. So I quickly backed off from that. But what you have to realize about crypto is that once you send the money, it's done. I mean, there's no way you can recover those funds. I would have to beg the guy to give it back to me. So because of the difficulty of the user experience, and because of the user interfaces that are still actually quite difficult, it turned out that the whole crypto world became not so much peer-to-peer. There's a lot of custodial services out there, and they're the main thing that people store. They're used to store their crypto wealth, to store their tokens, are basically their intermediaries, third-party intermediaries. That was something nobody expected. Another thing we didn't really expect was the strange way in which the appearance of cryptocurrency put a lot of pressure on the payment industry and banks themselves to upgrade their technologies and just get generally better. So that was a wonderful thing, actually, to see the way it competed. One final thing that I don't think anybody really expected is that the main use of cryptocurrency now is not so much to buy a sandwich or pay for a haircut, but is international remittances. It's still these days extremely difficult to get money across borders. And crypto makes that just so easy. And that's why in the United States, I don't know if it's going on in Brazil, a main venue for purchasing and actually using crypto tokens are these ATM machines stationed in small stores all over America, and they are doing so well, making so much money. It's a good, solid, stable industry that's rooted in crypto and is doing fantastically well and running circles around remittances from the old traditional way.
Yes, I think, Jeffrey, one way to go in that direction would be the WhatsApp Pay and Libra that are slowly moving because the central banks do not want to get disrupted. So that will be the biggest fight of all, to disrupt the central bank and have a private currency, but that's not the matter for our discussion here. So I would like Florian to comment a little bit on the credit financing.
Yeah, I think what Chris mentioned at the end of the day is technology taking out cost of the system, right? I think that's the first step. So by making processes digital, you take out cost, you make it more scalable, you achieve the economies of scale that digital provides, and there's a number of other layers that technology can bring, and one of them is the I guess when she was talking about the credit model being more advanced, is where you then are able to push boundaries and increase the innovation through technology, right? And I think Nubank certainly is a very successful example of doing that. I think it's in the loan lending process, it's not too dissimilar. We act on the secured lending side of things, especially on mortgages. It's a process in Brazil that's very concentrated still today amongst very few banks because of the funding, advantage, and purely offline manual processes today. And so I think for us, the first step, obviously, in that direction was to say, how can we make this experience more digital, more scalable, and to take out costs through that? I think the second thing that we are very excited about, and I think we'll see how the market will develop with that new information, is Brazil's currently low interest rates. I think that's a completely new paradigm that we're living in. Personally, as someone who has grown up here, I'm very excited about the prospects that this brings, because it essentially forces the capital that was a lazy type of capital here in Brazil to take on more risk. And more risk is basically found in many, many different ways. Infrastructure is one of those. Real estate is one of those. Obviously, the capital markets, public equities is another one of those. But the capital is going to try to find more risk. And then I think on the lending side of things, especially in the secured or in the unsecured environments, there's going to be many opportunities for the further fragmentation of the lending market. So if you look at the mortgage market in the U.S., 20 years ago, it was also a very concentrated market in the hands of a few big banks, and that has been fragmented over time. Also driven by low interest rates. So I think something very similar will happen here in Brazil, and then it's really exciting because technology is one of those avenues to give people access to that in a very cost-efficient manner. Personally at Loft, that's one of the things that we're most excited for the next few years.
Excellent. You mentioned the low interest rates. They're finally coming to Brazil, but outside of Brazil, they've been low for a long time, and it's impacting valuations a lot. So maybe some of the unicorns we have in Brazil should be rhinos, maybe, because of the amount of liquidity that we have. It's unprecedented. It looks a little bit like 1999 or 2007 all over again. So my question is, because Jeff Bezos used to say, don't feel smart because your valuation went up by 30%, because you don't want to feel dumber because the next month your valuation is going to be down 30%. So what do you guys think about the current credit overall environment in which interest rates are so low that valuations go up like crazy? And I think Hernan would like to comment on that as well. So maybe Hernan first and then you guys.
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant topic, but one where we have to be very careful and humble. I think that the kind of liquidity that the world is seeing today is totally unprecedented. And whatever we would have guessed a year ago about the impact of that is not what we see today in the market, right? So like we all would have said, inflation all over the place and lack of trust, etc. And what you see is deflation. You see increasing trust in the dollar, and that gets replicated in the different currencies, etc. So I think it's a very weird moment in time. I used to be an economist by formation, and whatever theory I had has proven to be wrong. So I'm being very, very careful here. But what you do see is that in terms of valuations for companies, etc., it's hard to argue whether a company should be worth $400 or $4,000 per share. But what you know is that the underlying business that those companies are commanding, and you can mention obviously Amazon or Mercado Libre or Facebook, Google, etc. All those companies today, they have better businesses versus the ones they had a few months ago, and their cash generation is improving. So is it going to be big enough to justify current valuations? Is it going to be higher because of low interest rates, etc.? So valuation should be even higher. Is it a bit too much, so valuation should be lower? I don't know. But what I do know is that there's true value in what is being done. And tech-wise, that is happening everywhere. It's happening with all the ecosystem in
Hernan,
Brazil.
How many unicorns are you a part of in Brazil now?
Probably 4 or 5.
Wow, that's amazing.
But again, I think that it's different to the time we went by in the 90s and 2000. I think now you have real companies with real users producing real value to them. Then it's really hard to analyze, is this company worth $1 billion, $2 billion, or 500? But for sure, it's not zero. That was what happened in 1999, because you had businesses that, interestingly, they all made sense. So for a while, we're all laughing at them and saying, how stupid, how can someone sell pet supplies online? Ha, 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 ha. You know what? That's doable. It was just 20 years earlier.
Yeah.
But it's doable. Oh, how can someone have a supermarket online? Ridiculous. Ha, ha, ha. You know, there are very successful supermarkets out there today, online supermarkets. So the issue was timing. But now all the companies that you have are producing revenues, are having real customers, etc. So they are building value. Then valuation is something that the market will eventually decide. And as you were just saying about Jeff Bezos' comment, it's hard to define exactly where the market is. So long term, we know that the markets tend to be very efficient. Short term, that is not always the case. So are we in one of those short-term cliffs? I don't know. But I think that if you bet on technology long term, you'll do well.
It's amazing that we think of Brazil, you know, as Argentines as well. We always think that our country is the worst. But surprisingly, the infrastructure, what you guys are building, you were the pioneers, and some others were not here, but you are definitely the core group of pioneers that developed the infrastructure for VCs and startup companies in Brazil. And it's amazing that this is all happening. It's absolutely unbelievable. I've never thought of seeing that kind of environment in Brazil. I don't know if it's going to change now. So maybe you could jump in and comment on what we're talking.
No, I think it's only going to get better, to be honest. I think there's obviously the question around valuation always, and I think Hernan is perfectly right. It's impossible to pin it down. But at the end of the day, it's also supply-demand question. And the reality is there's just a lot more supply of capital in the world than there is availability of interesting, transformative, growth-oriented companies. And I think for Brazil specifically, I mean, if you think back over the last 10 years, it was, I mean, the beginnings were incredibly painful. I don't even want to think about Hernan's days at Mercado Livre. That must have been even crazier. But I think the rails are getting better. The infrastructure is getting better. And now I think the fact that we are having this low interest rate environment is even more conducive to entrepreneurship, to taking risk, and to basically driving the transformation. And I'm personally super excited about that, and I think that's not going to end. Although we have to recognize that, like in '99, we will have some hiccups. You will have a couple of busts. You will have companies potentially IPOing that shouldn't be IPOing. Like things like that will happen. And in the short term, that's not great. But if you take a long-term perspective, and if you then in 10 years look back, you'll see that was all very much a positive trend. So it's hard not to be very optimistic these days on technology.
What do you think, Chris?
So leave the economics part to the economists, like in the room, like that's not my thing. But here's how I think about those things. You got to look at the fundamentals. And historically, you've always seen bad companies that didn't have any fundamentals or bad fundamentals, and they went belly up at some point. And you've had good companies that, regardless of how hard the environment was, like they thrived and they moved forward. I think there's a little bit of the phenomena that we're observing right now, which is just selection bias for stronger, better companies. Just given everything that has happened, all the economic hardship that is affecting all markets. There's a lot of like smaller companies just dying, and the bigger companies getting stronger. So there's some effect there. But I think it comes down to what value such companies are creating to the world. Do they have customers? Do they have revenue? Like, are fundamentals there or not, right? That's what we should care about ultimately. And I think sometimes people lose track of that. Like sometimes people get too excited about how everything seems to be going up or how much liquidity is out there. But there's a saying that I often repeat to my teams is like, you can fool a lot of people for a short time. You can fool very few people for a very long time, but a lot of people for a very long time, like it's just not feasible. At some point, right. Things just.
I remember when
or Warren Buffett says, right, like that when the tide is low, you see who was swimming naked, and I guess
right. Yeah, when Jorge Paulo used to say when I complained about the government, I said, forget the government and go out there and do stuff. Jeffrey, we have 1 minute. I would like you are gonna end it all. So please comment on whatever you wish.
I was during your very interesting discussion about the economic environment there. I'm very worried about. Well, let me just put it this way: the United States, and I would say the world economy in general, is going to go through a pretty rough time, I would think, for the next couple of years, because the unprecedented interventions that have taken place over the last 6 months. There's going to be a lot of liquidation of real estate and more companies going belly up in the U.S. It's going to be very challenging times. And I agree, too, that it's hard to predict what this looks like. The Federal Reserve is engaged in unprecedented levels of money printing here. On the other hand, we've seen a tremendous fall in the velocity of money and an increase of savings as a result of the COVID lockdown crisis, and that puts pressure in the other direction. So we could actually end up with not inflation, but rather deflation. I think, and also the disruption to the industrial sector in the United States has been essentially unprecedented. We've had more than 100,000 small and medium-sized businesses actually go out of business. I'm not actually pessimistic, though. I think what we've seen over the last 20 years is, thanks to technology and to the dynamism of markets, markets are capable of doing things that are beyond, way beyond the expectations of intellectuals and economists. We could be seeing an economic miracle dawn within 18 to 24 months like we've never seen before. And I hope that we can learn from the experience for the last 8 months and let the markets be free, let them be global, let entrepreneurs innovate and create and trust the signals of prices and empower our people with a vision of creativity and it's going to benefit the United States, Russia. We get back on track.
Well, we couldn't hear the last words of Jeffrey, but we are on time to finish. Chris, Florian, Hernan, Jeffrey, it was a privilege being part of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.